tonight's secret submission is even new to me. So please welcome London from the state of South Carolina to the program.
Hey, I'm London, and I'd like to tell my story. We had this thing that we go on to call a witch mongoose. Sounds like a goofy name, but I'm from South Carolina, and we live in a very small town. And thank you, Derek, for everything you do. We love your podcast. Now I'll get on with the story. So I live in this house, and it was just me and my family and stuff like that. We've never had problems before. Never. With anything. Like, I probably didn't even know what the term cryptid meant. My parents kind of shielded me from, ghosts and stuff like that. So I never really was really into that. So we would hear, like, if you just walked outside, or, my parents were smokers. They go outside and smoke, and they hear, like, this distinct laugh, like a cackling almost, like a deep, like, monkey cackling. It was weird. And it's South Carolina. We don't have monkeys. So I don't think we really have anything that would laugh like that either, like a cackling. So my parents would ignore it, but they would tell me that every time they heard that cackle, that something bad would always happen in that day or the next. And I never believed it. My brother, sister, we never heard such things, so we didn't really believe it. And then I was outside one time after my parents had gotten into this big argument. And I was outside, and I heard the cackle. I was out there by myself, just stepping outside for a moment, and I was like, what in the world? It kind of freaked me out a little bit, I'm not going to lie. But I just stayed there because I was kind of paralyzed in fear. And I just stood and I looked, and I was like, I have no idea. Is this the cackle my parents were talking about? Is what I was thinking to myself. And then that same day, my parents had filed a divorce. And I was like, oh my gosh, dude. I was a child. I was thinking it couldn't get worse than this. And then what happened was, couple months later, didn't really think about it again. It was honestly out of my head. Wasn't really choked up about it or anything. And then me and my sister had went outside because she was babysitting me at the time after the divorce. We were outside and we heard this same cackle. We both kind of looked at each other in a moment of realization, like, oh geez, we know what this is. And me and my sister, we were like, oh my. So we just hogged butt inside. And then, craziest thing, that same day, me and my sister had gotten into a really bad argument. She had pushed me down the stairs, and it didn't really hurt me, but she had pushed me down the stairs, this child abuse. And I was like, this is getting crazy. And my mom would talk about her experience when she heard the laughing. And, she was outside smoking. She ignored it. She's not really one to be scared of the paranormal or, supernatural or cryptid or whatever. She just walked back inside, burnt out a cigarette. I do remember this, though. That same night, my older brother and my mom had gotten in a bad argument. Her phone was thrown against the mirror and cracked. So, that's my story about the witch mongoose. Thank you, Derek. Tell me if you know anything about what this could possibly be. It's over now. It's not really something I'm worried about anymore. But thank you, and hope to see my call on the next episode. Bye.
Thank you, London. I certainly don't know much, or anything, about a witch mongoose. But I do know of another mongoose that's quite possibly the most well-known mongoose of them all. Jeff, the talking mongoose.
This is indeed a very strange and a real creepy true story. It all began in the legendary location, the Isle of Man. In the early 20th century, this bizarre story got loads of press in the British tabloids. September of 1931, the Irving family was sitting down enjoying a nice home-cooked meal when all of a sudden they started to hear scratches on the wall. They didn't think much of it at the time and figured it must be a rat or some sort of small animal trapped within the walls. Over time, the scratching would become more and more frequent. Then one day the family heard a voice coming from within the walls. This voice introduced itself to the family as Jeff. It told the Irvings that it was a very clever talking mongoose and that it was born in 1852 in New Delhi, India. According to the family, Jeff was the size of a small rat with yellowish fur and a very large bushy tail. Jeff told the family that it was an earthbound spirit, a ghost in the form of a mongoose. It also said that it was a freak of nature. Jeff and the Irvings became very close. Jeff would guard the house when they were out and inform them if anyone was approaching. Jeff would also keep a close eye on the fire, as the Irvings would constantly forget to put it out. Jeff would also make sure none of the family members overslept. Jeff would assume the role of a house cat and help the family with their rodent problems, although Jeff would rather scare them than kill them. Over time, Jeff was considered to be another member of the family. Now, this story of Jeff spread like wildfire among the local residents. Eventually, every newspaper in Britain wrote a story about Jeff. People were amazed by the story, and they all flocked to the Isle of Man in hopes that they could get a glimpse of Jeff, the talking mongoose.
That clip comes courtesy of The Sun. Thank you again, London, for taking the time to share your call. And thank you for sticking around to the end of the program. Have a great night.
I always enjoyed looking out the window until I saw myself looking right back at me. I have always had a fear of drowning. That is, until I didn't. I had this tree that sat in my backyard for years and years. It had a rope tied to it for the kids to swing on, but it had another purpose as I jumped off the branch it was connected to. There was this abandoned house 2 blocks away from my school I would commonly go see. When my memory came back, and I realized I used to live there before I started the fire. My best friend passed away last week. I would meet him soon, I said as I pulled the trigger. I heard my mother call my name from downstairs. Then she called my name right outside my door. I jumped out my window as I realized I was home alone for the weekend. I woke up to hear all the screams. Relax, Paul, it's just a dream. Here deep in the ground, we'll make sure you'll never be found. My mother came in the bedroom to use the bathroom, but as I turned over, my mother laid right next to me. I begin tucking him into bed, and he tells me, "Daddy, check for monsters under my bed." I look underneath for his amusement to see another him under the bed staring back at me, quivering and whispering, "Daddy, there's somebody on my bed." was so happy to show off my science experiment at school. I proudly showed off my baby brother and explained that it had taken exactly 437 elastic bands to crush his skull. "Daddy, there's a man in my closet," my daughter says to me. "It's just your imagination, honey," I say back while trying to think of another place to hide a real father's body. I don't like playing hide and seek with my mommy and daddy. It's because mommy gets really scared and cries when daddy finds me first. Three years ago, my aunt went missing. By the time the cops found her body, my uncle had already eaten most of her. A warm, sleepy feeling came over me. I almost didn't mind the masked stranger dragging the knife across my throat.
Good evening and welcome to Monsters Among Us. I'm your guide, Derek Hayes.
Bridger, this is Darkstar. See that out. Darkstar copies all. Go ahead. Message to observer. Alpha 3 round, 18 delay in effect. 3 guns. Bravo 2 rounds, 2 guns. Smoke on the deck. SEAD, CAS TOT 62. Target number, Hotel November 5209. Request flash out.
Ladies, gentlemen, creatures of the night, thank you for choosing Monsters Among Us for your listening pleasure. Tonight's mid-season episode is a special one. A couple of months back, I asked for submissions from members of the armed forces, and just as I expected, they delivered. Now I have a pile of submissions to work through, so what do you guys say? Should we get started? To kick off this evening, we venture west, over the Pacific, to the tiny islands of Hawaii. The following is Eli's double submission.
Hey, Derek, calling in with some military stories. So back in 2015, I was on deployment with the Navy somewhere in the Middle East area out in the ocean. Saw a lot of crazy things, but one of the scariest things that happened was, so there's a ghost that sits on the aft end of the ship that a lot of the watchstanders named the No-Face Man. Well, I had never seen him and all that kind of stuff. Well, one particular day, a friend of mine was standing mid-watch. I didn't sleep real well on deployment, so he asked if I could come out there and just keep him company for a little while. And I said, no big deal. About 12:30, 1 o'clock, I head out there, and my buddy's face is just ghost white. I'm like, dude, what's up? He said, man, there's something sitting in that chair. There's a chair right up against the bulkhead, and he was over on the railing. And I looked back, and sure enough, there was what looked like a person sitting there that didn't have a face. And we just kind of looked at him for a while, and nothing really had happened. And after about an hour or so, we looked back, and he was gone. Well, I didn't think anything of it until early 2016. I was with a guy doing watch up on the flight deck. We were offloading a bunch of the munitions we had, and No-Face Man had moved from the aft end of the ship to the flight deck. I walked out of a space that was right up on the flight deck where we were stayed in to try to keep warm a little bit, and I turned the corner outside of the space and was face to face with a solid human figure that I could see all his features except for his face. I saw hands, I saw feet. I even saw that he was wearing a older military uniform that we called dungarees in the Navy. So that freaked me out pretty bad, and after that, I was very thankful to never have another run-in with No-Face Man. But that's one of my military stories. I figured this one would get a kick too, and I want to know if anybody else has ever seen anything like this. So again, on my 2015 deployment, we had left Hong Kong 2 days prior, and we're out in the middle of the ocean somewhere, and a friend of mine, different from the friend that I called in at the previous story, just said he wanted me to see something that he's seen the last couple of nights, last couple of times he's been out there on watch on the aft end of the ship again. So, of course, I'm into weird stuff and paranormal and all that, so I wanted to see what he was seeing. So I go back there just before midnight. You know, I've always heard about the flash that you see when the sun sets and things like that. This was not that. The sun has already set. It was pitch black, stars in the sky, open night, nothing crazy. And he just told me to watch the horizon. So as I'm watching the horizon, this green light shoots up from the water or the horizon or whatever. And he calls it in to the bridge. They tell him on his headset, and the bridge tells him to hold on and that they were get back to him. And as he's waiting for them to call back, he's like, watch, they're going to tell me just to watch it and say nothing. Sure enough, somebody comes over to him on the headset. I can't hear it. And he says, copy all, looks over at me and just starts smiling. And I said, what? Said they told me to just keep an eye on it and don't say anything. So we watched it for a good, what felt like maybe 5 to 7 minutes or so. And it just, starting from the horizon, going up into the air, just disappeared. Don't know what it was. Don't know if anybody else has ever seen it. I know there's a theory that extraterrestrials are actually under us rather than above us. Want to know if anybody else has ever seen anything like that. Love your stuff. Keep it up. Can't wait for the military stories. Bye, Derek.
Thank you, Eli. Now, nothing beats a good haunted ship story. And Eli's experience is not a rare occurrence. In the U.S. alone, there are a number of military ships that tout claims of the paranormal. The USS Battleship Texas recently opened a nightly ghost tour. The USS Lexington, docked in Corpus Christi, Texas, also has received claims of the ghostly variety, as has the USS Wisconsin, the USS Iowa, and even the majestic Queen Mary, which served as a military transport during World War II. And our very own Sarah Dinsmore has had her own experience with ghostly voices, knocks, whistles, and a laundry list of other experiences from the USS Salem. Now, another infamously haunted military vessel is the USS North Carolina, and who better to hear stories from about this infamously haunted ship than the Night Guardman.
The battleship North Carolina has been docked here in Wilmington since 1961. Tourists climb aboard every day, but only one man stays aboard every night. What's it like to be on board that huge, hulking, creaking metal monster? Just ask the night watchman, a man with nerves of steel.
The thing that makes it so scary is, in my situation, I'm the only one on here, and it's at night.
And sometimes at night, Danny Bradshaw feels he's not the only one on here.
I hear this. Footsteps.
Footsteps?
I shined the light real quick. Standing right there in that passageway is where I saw the ghost. He had white flames shooting right out of his head. And when I saw him, I started screaming. I went crazy. I just lost it. And then he turned his head away, and that was it. It lasted maybe no more than 5 seconds.
Danny Bradshaw has worked aboard the battleship for 30 years.
People ask me, they say, well, how in the God's world do you stay on a ship at night and it's haunted? It's so rare that these things happen. Every day when I come into work, I don't think about it.
That is, until it happens again.
That ghost was standing right there. It was the same one that I saw there. He did just like this, turn, looked at me and looked away, and disappeared.
Do you think you're mistaken in what you saw?
No. The encounters that I've had, I mean, it's unbelievable, the things that have happened. You know, I've made comments and I've heard people say it, I'd like to see a ghost. Believe me, you never want to see one. You'll carry it with you till the day you die.
Think you'll see the ghost again?
I hope to God I never see him.
That clip comes courtesy of WRAL.com. Now, since Eli's call was a two-parter, let's focus on the second half. That strange light that he saw over the ocean. Now, you may be shocked to hear that this type of thing is repeated quite often. In fact, these sightings are older than the European discovery of the Americas. Check out this report from a polarizing historical figure, an experience that seems to usher in a new discovery that will change the planet forever.
October 11th, 1492, 10 p.m. A calm, clear night. Christopher Columbus and his crew moved slowly across one of the deepest ravines of the Atlantic and through the Bermuda Triangle. Below them is almost 4 miles of water. Suddenly, unearthly lights are seen flashing across the bottom of the ocean. In less than 5 hours, they would discover the New World. This possible USO incident is more than just legend and lore. For the first time ever, original text from Columbus's log has been made available to the History Channel by archivists at Fordham University, custodian of a rare handwritten copy of the journal. The October 11, 1492 sighting was not an isolated occurrence. Over the 2-month journey, Columbus's log exhibits a consistent pattern of cryptically reported peculiar incidents. Entries on both September 17th and September 20th indicate that stars, or other unidentified lights in the sky, are seen to move.
The cause was that the star moved from its place, but the needles remained stationary.
And from the infamous entry of October 11th.
The Admiral, at 10 o'clock that evening, standing on the quarterdeck, saw a light. Calling to Pero Gutierrez, he told him he saw a light and bid him look that way, which he did, and saw it. The Admiral again perceived it once or twice, appearing like the light of a wax candle, moving up and down.
Is it possible that these strange events, recorded during the most fabled nautical journey in history, were the result of otherworldly vessels tracking Columbus's fleet?
That clip comes from an old UFO Files episode on the History Channel. The sighting report and journal entry are hotly debated. Many feel the entire thing has been fabricated. But I should point out that pilots in World War II saw strange lights that they called Foo Fighters. The number of UFO sightings goes up in areas in and around nuclear testing sites. So is it that these entities are there for a major event in human history, keeping an eye on us? Or if we really want to speculate, could they be time travelers, nonchalantly revisiting some of humankind's most monumentous moments? Oh yeah, there's one more thing. They were mere miles from shore, so perhaps they experienced some sort of bioluminescent bacteria, like what has been lighting up the beaches here in Southern California over the past few weeks. The truth is, we'll probably never know. But thank you, Eli, for that great submission. Our next story from the service comes to us from Logan. Logan, the floor is yours.
Hello, my name's Logan, calling about your military stories, and I have a pretty good one. So it was January 2014. I was stationed at Schofield Barracks, Hawaii. I was with a unit named 121 ACO, and we were doing a live fire squad training exercise one night on the Kolikoli Mountain Range, which there's been stories of stuff happening there before as far as ghosts and stuff. And
as my platoon did a live fire exercise one night. The other platoon that was there, they were training for it. Well, they heard a woman screaming enough that they got everyone ready with night vision to go search the jungle to find a woman out there. And they searched for hours, and they found nothing. We didn't hear about this story until later on. And that same night, we had actually had someone running through our sleeping area, which I don't know if listeners may know, but you have a fire guard, which will stay awake 1 hour every night, kind of rotate through, and they found no one. But yet someone was running through our sleeping area, and people were waking up to someone running through the area. But, yeah, that was my story.
Thank you, Logan. That one will make your hair stand up. So perhaps strangely enough, my first suspect here was actually Bigfoot. Anyone that's listened to the show for any length of time knows that Sasquatch is believed to scream at night. The reasons vary. In addition, the running through the camp scenario also rings of Bigfoot behavior. But unless things have changed recently, Hawaii has long stood as the only state in the Union without a reported Sasquatch sighting. So I'm going to go out on a limb here and say we're probably barking up the wrong tree with Bigfoot. But who else or what else would be foolish enough to mess with a bunch of servicemen in the field, let alone trespass in their camp? Hawaii has some amazing folklore, and I wouldn't be surprised if there was some story out there that fits this description, although I was unable to find it. Regardless, thank you again, Logan, for sharing that creepy submission. You know, maybe one of the listeners out there knows of such folklore from the Aloha State. If so, you know what to do. And this doubles for anyone else with a supernatural encounter anywhere in the world. Just call the hotline at 1-888-608-NIGHT. That's 1-888-608-6444. And speaking of submissions and seamless segues, our next frightening fable was brought to us from Jamie in Colorado.
Hey Derek, my name is Jamie. I'm from Texas. I'm currently residing in Colorado in the Boulder area. I was thinking about calling in and finally contributing to the podcast, and I heard the call out for military stories, so I took that as a sign, decided to give you a call and finally tell you probably the most crazy supernatural related story of my life. So this happened in the summer of 2014 when I was deployed to East Afghanistan to a really small fob called Camp Clark, north of a city called Coast. I don't remember exactly what month this was, but it was definitely in the middle of the summer. And the first thing that started happening, I guess I should preface with the other creepy thing that happened before the main event, was on the far side of this area where that was meant for landing helicopters. It was just a gravel field, but not the small kind of gravel, but the palm-sized rocks that you might see on the side of railroad tracks. We would have to pull guard on the other side of this wall at all hours, 24/7. And oftentimes you have to, just walk out there at night to replace somebody for guard. It's important to note as well, there's no light pollution where we were at. We use no lights at night, except for red lights, obviously, because just to avoid giving, snipers or mortar teams easy shot at us. So we just used red lights. And during a new moon, you could hold your hand right in front of your face, right past your nose, and you can't see a thing. What started happening is sometimes at night when I'd be walking to or back from this guard shift, specifically on new moon nights, I noticed, I would be walking and I could have swore I heard other footsteps right behind me, making sound in the gravel. And I would stop. The creepiest thing is I would stop and I would just turn around and I would hear a couple more footsteps come, and it almost felt like somebody was standing right beyond the short distance my red light could see. And of course I would take a couple more steps towards that direction to see if I could see anything. Would almost walk in a circle because it was making me so crazy. It happened almost every time. Another handful of guys in my platoon noticed the same thing. A lot of other guys had no idea what we were talking about. The night in question that I'm calling about was, long story short, I was just on guard at our vehicles. We had really old vehicles with bad radios, and it took a long time for our radio techs to make sure everything was online and connected and had all our channels set. And sometimes the night before a mission where we were going to use those vehicles, which was pretty rare, usually we went on foot, we would have to keep the vehicles on all night, which was pretty easy. The batteries in them were so efficient. You just had to idle it a couple of times a night for 20 minutes or so, and the vehicle would stay on. On this night, it was my responsibility to keep the trucks running throughout the night. I actually covered down for a friend of mine who was a guy in my platoon who was running on little to no sleep. I was sitting in one of the trucks just reading a book. I start hearing footsteps again. And, of course, I'm thinking it's anybody from my platoon sergeant to first sergeant to come check on me, make sure I'm doing what I'm supposed to be. And every time I would poke my head out, nobody would be there, though. The next thing that happened is kind of this disturbing part. Up to this point, I'm sorry, I forgot to tell you a little bit of lore that I heard before this happened, which I don't know if is related to the event or not, honestly. I'm wondering if I just invented this in my head, but a bunch of guys I had been talking to, long security shifts, you talk. Guys were telling me that the 10th Mountain Division, the unit that we replaced when we went there, said that there was a ghost on post. And actually, specifically in one of the guard towers that overlooked the staging area for our vehicles, they say he shot himself in this tower, and they described him as a black guy wearing BDUs, which was a camo pattern that the Army used shortly before right before I actually joined the military is when they changed it to Digicam. I don't think they said what unit patch he had on, though, but they said he was a black man, and he or a kid, really, and he was wearing BDUs. I was sitting in one of the vehicles that was currently running, and had a little soft light on, and I was using that to read my book. I don't know what made me look over, but I looked up from my book, and I just casually kind of glanced to the left, and in the vehicle next to mine, where there's also kind of a soft glow of light, I see... If this is real, if this is true, I see who I think this was. And it was just a moment, but I look over and I see a black guy staring straight ahead, as if he doesn't even know I exist. He's just staring blankly ahead. He was wearing BDUs, and he had blood dripping from the top of his head down the side of his face that was facing me. And I could see one of his eyes, and his eyes were like whited out. I don't remember having the thought to look away or anything, but just unconsciously something forced me to look away, like I was seeing something I shouldn't. And when I looked back, he was gone, of course. The strangest part about what happened, and I'm sorry, I should clarify, this happened around 3 a.m. and then I didn't hear any footsteps the rest of the night. After this deployment, the strangest thing that came about from this, shortly after getting home, I started having these reoccurring dreams of that exact moment where I look over and I see him. Except this time, instead of looking away, I can't look away. And I'm just kind of frozen looking at him. Except this time, instead of just looking straight forward, he slowly turns his head to look at me. He looks at me, and both of his eyes are whited out. And slowly he starts opening his mouth with what I would describe as a very excited look, like in his eyes. He's slowly opening his mouth, but he has this look of excitement on his face as he does it. And sand starts gushing, pouring out of his mouth. And then I would wake up. Just when I think this reoccurring dream, I'm kind of done with it. Of course it comes. But now it's down to just a couple of times a year, I would say. When I first got home, it was a couple of times a month. And I had a much more severe reaction to it as well. Yeah, supernaturally speaking, that's the craziest thing that's ever happened to me. I'm fully aware that, this was close to 3 a.m. I was stressed like crazy, working like crazy, getting little to no sleep. But other things supernatural related have happened to me. And